That's brilliant.
How's that? How's that, Gian?
Good, good, good.
Shall we start?
Yes.
Have we got, okay, you've got a number of participants because I can't see that, how many there are.
Yes, we've got 15. You can start.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are, this is the second introductory talk on the night skies of Botswana. And what I'm going to say tonight continues from what was said last month, the same time, by Gian in my place. And I'm going to carry it forward for August. So I gave you some homework last month. I pointed out you have to find Scorpio as a point of reference, then the 2 pointers. I also suggested you look at Crux with the jewel box and the Coalsack, Centaurus and Capricorn. So I'm sure all of you are now familiar with Scorpio, the 2 pointers, and also what I haven't put here is the ecliptic line. I'm assuming that you're all familiar with that. Right, so what can we see from next month or from tonight till the end of next month? And there's a map which I've taken from the 2022 Guide to the Night Sky. So as I said last time, what can you see? The first thing to look for is your point of reference, which is Scorpio. Scorpio is in the upper half, and this is looking north. So it's in the upper half of your screen. On the left-hand side, you can see Scorpio. The next thing to look for is the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the imaginary line which the sun, the moon, and the planets and the 12 zodiacal constellations follow. So you should be getting some sort of order into the night sky. So let's look for, first of all, the Milky Way. Now, when I say look for, I'm showing you a chart. But what I'm suggesting to you is to get, or to try and in the next month, to get 100 kilometers from the cities and towns of Botswana. The best places to go is Mabusahubi or Kutsi or the Central Kalahari or Makgadikgadi or Naipan. If you get there on a night when there's not much moon, when you see the night sky between 9 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, you will say hallelujah, because it'll be an incredible sight. You cannot get that feeling if you sit in Gaborone and look at the skies. You don't get it. Just like nobody in Europe sees the skies, the night skies as they should, only when you go far away from the city and the light pollution will you see it. So if you can go out there, go with a friend, a spouse, partner, whoever. One of you has binoculars, the other has a laser pointer or a strong torch, and you point with the torch at where you want to see. Then with your binoculars, you go up the light to the point in the sky. So you start with Scorpio and find your bearings. Then you find the imaginary line, the ecliptic, and we take from there. So you've got Scorpio, you've got the Milky Way, the ecliptic line, then you look for the planets. And in this next month, there are 2 planets up. One is Jupiter, and that, if you look at the chart, is on the right-hand side coming up, and the other is Saturn. They're both bright planets, and you'll easily pick them up. Then the constellation I'm going to focus on tonight is Sagittarius. I'll also mention Capricorn because Capricorn is very precious, and I'll tell you why later. So Sagittarius, in the middle of Sagittarius is the teapot, and on my chart I've got a big arrow on the right-hand side pointing at Sagittarius. I've got an arrow pointing at Scorpius, and I've got an arrow pointing at the ecliptic. So this is, I've brought forward what Sagittarius looks like to us. So you can see it's a very big constellation. It goes from the left-hand side, there's the teapot, down all the way up. This was first identified by Ptolemy in about 200 AD, and one of 48 constellations which he identified. I don't know if you can see behind the pictures, I've talked about Sagittarius is Latin for archer. Two features of Sagittarius are the two nebula, Lagoon Nebula and Trifid Nebula. So let's just have a look at the next one. What is a nebula? A nebula is a giant cloud of dust and gas. The gas is mainly hydrogen and helium in space. And over time, these the gravity attracts them to attracts the particles to one another. And a nebula is the place where stars are formed, and eventually they form a very hot core and a star is formed. On the left, you can see a picture of Lagoon Nebula and Trifid Nebula. Those were taken by the Hubble telescope. They're not exactly in relation to one another as we see them. Lagoon is higher than Trifid. This is what the teapot looks like in the northern hemisphere. So what the myth goes is that the teapot is, the steam is coming out of the teapot, and all the stars in the Milky Way are the steam. This is how Sagittarius the Archer was drawn. On the left is the formation of the stars in the constellation Sagittarius, and on the right is an artist's representation of Sagittarius. Now, I want to reiterate, we do not see Sagittarius like that. That is how it's seen in the northern hemisphere. Now you can see how we see Sagittarius. It's exactly 180 degrees out. Southern hemisphere sees all the constellations the right way up. Northern hemisphere sees them upside down. You tell them that. They won't believe you, but tell them. Northern hemisphere is upside down to the way we see it. So that's the constellation. Now, I think my time is coming to an end. Our homework for next month, go out and find Sagittarius. It's right next to Scorpio. Have a look at Lagoon Nebula. You'll need binoculars for that, but the nebula is important, and we're working towards, I'm going to come next time, bring in the nebula and star clusters, global clusters. Then make sure you can see Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is coming up from the east. Saturn is quite high in the sky. And Capricorn. Capricorn is important for two reasons. Firstly, it's the logo of our society, and it's almost getting ready to sink down towards the west. The other reason, you have to look at Capricorn now, because Capricorn is going to become important in December. In December, the sun is directly above the Tropic of Capricorn. And that is why it's called Tropic of Capricorn, because the sun is in Capricorn. And in December, when the sun is over Tropic of Capricorn and shines directly down your chimney, you cannot see Capricorn. You have to see it now. And that applies to every constellation which is in the sky. If you want to see your constellation, you have to look 6 months either before or after your birthday before you can see to see your constellation properly. So please go out, find Sagittarius, Lagoon Nebula, the two planets, Capricorn, have fun, but get out away from the city lights. And all you need is a good pair of binoculars and a strong torch. Happy viewing. See you next month. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harold. Yes, we will have this up on our website very soon.
Stop
Thank
sharing.
you, Harold. And now it's exact. Yes. We will have it up on the website very soon.
Thank you.
So we are exactly at 6:30, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to introduce our speaker for this evening. It's Dr. Fulvio Franchi, who is currently holding the position of Associate Professor in Sedimentology at BUST, which is the Botswana International University of Science and Technology in Palape. And he's the founder of the Planetary and Space Science Research Group at BUST. His main interest is in exploration and characterization of terrestrial analogues for planetary research. In the past 3 years, he has successfully participated in 2 NERC projects and led his institution into the Europlanet 2024 research infrastructure. He coordinated the planetary field analogues at Makadikadi Pans in Botswana as part of the Europlanet 2024 research infrastructure. So I'm glad to hand it over to Fulvio for making his presentation.
Thank you, Jihan. And I made you host of the meeting because while I'm presenting, I'm unable to see if someone else knock at the door. So just keep an eye on the people, please. Otherwise, let me share my screen. There you go. Okay, so thank you for having me again. I remember giving a presentation on astrobiology in one of the first monthly meeting of the society when we were still able to meet in person. I'm glad to give this second part of the talk. You know, as it happens very often, I start digging into my lectures and other seminars, and the trip from Botswana to Mars and return became a bit broader, so you will forgive me. And Jihan, please stop me when I'm going beyond my scheduled time. I will start with a definition, because maybe not all of you are familiar with terrestrial analogues. These are environments, either existing or fossil, on our planet that have physical and or chemical characteristics in common with other celestial bodies like Mars, the Moon, or other planets. And these are important laboratories where planetary scientists can run their experiments. The reason is that most of the time these are extreme environments. And when we talk about extreme, we are always referring to life. So something extreme for life to exist. So these environments are very important because they teach us what are the limits of life as we know it. And around this type of environment, a new branch of space science was created, which is called astrobiology. There is much more than this. But I had to give you this very initial presentation of what terrestrial analogues are. So they are extreme environments for very different reasons on our planet that we can touch, we can visit, and they allow us to understand and to broaden our understanding of life. So clearly, everything began when we start looking at planets in a different way. So I'm taking Mars as an example because that's where I did most of my research. We used to see Mars as the red planet because it's scorched by the sun, there's no atmosphere, it's barren, is under constant erosion by the wind. But now we're pretty much sure that Mars was warmer and wetter. Exactly at the same time, while on our planet Earth, the first life forms were evolving. So this immediately triggered the curiosity of many scientists that start looking at how can we figure out how Mars was when it was warmer and wetter, because we don't have a time machine. So the best thing to do is to get some geologists like me and tell them, now you go out and you find us the most extreme environment on planet Earth. And that's what I do. That's my job. And luckily enough, I'm in Botswana, where there are a bunch of extreme environments. My job is to go in, not just my job, but of planetary geologist, is to go out in the field, explore these environments that can be a desert, a hot spring hydrothermal vent. It can be several thousands of meters below the ocean. It can be on the polar, under the polar ice. It can be everywhere. Today, I'm going to focus on two. Well, actually, that was the original plan, but then I added the third one as a sort of surprise. Two of these analogues which are in Africa, and the first one is in Morocco, where I did my PhD, and I had to dig out some information from a few years back. And the other one is the Makadi salt pans. So we start with Morocco, and if you drive south across the Anti-Atlas, at one point you get into the Sahara, the rocky Sahara desert. And if you go near a city called Arfoud, you end up into this fantastic rocky hill where there are all these conical mounds, as we call them, that are standing out from this very flat surface of the hill. So these mounds are called cascades. The name comes from the pot that is used to cook the couscous. So I need to summarize decades of work, so you will bear with me. These are interesting geological sites for many, many reasons, because they do have characteristics that we look for when we look for an analog. They have shapes that resemble something that we've seen on other planets. They are extreme in terms that they are linked with fluids that normally are not good for life, like hydrothermal fluids and methane. And they're good because they're very, very old, but they can still preserve fossils of microbial life. So for the geologists amongst you, I will talk a little bit about faults. So these cascades in Morocco, they are this sort of mounds formed on top of faults. And this is very important because faults are preferential pathway for the circulation of fluids. And we'll see it a little bit later. I forgot to mention something very, very important. If you see in every slide, at the bottom left corner or at the bottom right corner, there is a planet. Because I understand this kind of topic, jumping from one planet to the other, can create confusion. So whenever you're lost, you don't know where you are in the solar system, just look at the corners and you'll see if you are on planet Earth or on Mars or somewhere else. So the cascades in Morocco are formed along faults. And they have this fantastic conical shape that has a striking resemblance with something that we've explored on Mars. So on the right-hand side, you see some conical mounds on Mars, and you gotta trust me because these, I know they don't look like Mars, but these are high-resolution images taken from equatorial region of Mars, and you see this conical mound with a beautiful layering, and these mounds are formed on top of fractures, the same fractures that created the craters and that allegedly allowed the water to reach the surface and precipitate these sediments. Another reason why the cascades in Morocco are very interesting is because they are linked with methane. So these mounds were forming under the water in around 360, 400 million years ago. And through these faults, there was a circulation of methane. Now, methane and also hydrothermal fluids, I will show you later. So methane, it might be very unpopular because it's a greenhouse gas, because we definitely don't like it as humans. We prefer to breathe oxygen. But there are a whole lot of organisms even complex one like mussels and worms that can live only thanks to methane. And amongst them, there are also some bacteria that are called chemosynthetic. And chemosynthetic bacteria are probably amongst the first that populated our planet. Hence, the study of cascads, which are linked with fluids rich in methane and possibly preserve chemosynthetic bacteria, is important for us to understand what we might expect on Mars. Because in fact, in the early 2000s, there was a lot of noise made by some American scientists because they believed they found methane on Mars. So of course, a lot of people around the world, including my supervisor and me, start looking around the globe for places which were suitable laboratory where to study the effect of methane. So remember that we always, our job is try to create a parallelism. So to study something that is here in our backyard, but at the same time has to inform us of what we might find on Mars. Well, it turns out that it's not true that there is methane on Mars. So this was like 5-10 years fashion that subsided very soon. But there are other reasons why places like the Cascades in Morocco could be interesting. For instance, because they are linked with hydrothermal fluids. So hydrothermal fluids, which are normally very hot, exactly like methane, are believed to be the first media that harbored life on our planet. So once again, they might preserve fossils of bacteria that very much resemble the ancestral life on our planet, and therefore, by assumption, also something that we might expect on Mars. Now here in this slide, I just put some geological stuff, but let's focus on the left where there are beautiful fossils of bacteria found in hydrothermal environment. So again, this is very important because all the features that we describe on Mars are explained in one way or the other with expulsion of fluid. So either that being springs, so underground water, or being mud volcanoes like the one we have in Kazakhstan, or hydrothermal activity. On Mars, one way or the other, there was some water. So now, thanks to the study of this sort of analogues, we are trying to narrow down the most likely scenario. I will conclude talking about the cascades with what, for me and the people that do my work, is the most important aspect. These are pictures coming from the cascades mounds, and they show you micromorphology. Look at the scale. We're talking about 5, 10, 1 micrometers. And these are what we believe are fossils of those bacteria that were living in this extreme environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, this is how life would look like on Mars if we ever manage to find any evidence. So I know many people expect to see some amazing stuff, but what we are actually looking for are fossils of bacteria. And before you have some example of these fossils of bacteria. Okay, so I need to bring you back to what is the core business of my job. This is Mars, and my job is to find evidences for life and water on Mars. So I'm going in the field and I'm looking for places where the presence of water, it's preserved into the rock record. It's very important. And believe it or not, the Makgadikgadi Pans of Botswana, which is the second place where I'm taking you today, it's a fantastic analog because although for most of the year it's extremely dry, it's very informative for us because there is still life, and this life, of course, is linked to the very little water that sits into the sediments during the dry season. So I guess that most of you are familiar with the Makari pans, and these are in the center of Botswana. And you probably used to think about them as a dry place, wet only for a few months a year, and that water is mostly rainwater. But the truth is that this place is actually wet even during the dry season. And this is a clear example of what happens if you try to cross the Makari pans, even during the dry season when you think that everything is going to be okay. In this little water that is present in the pan, there are other complicated situations. Let me use this informal terminology. It's not just the absence of water, or I'd say the absence of water during most of the year, but it's also the fact that whatever lives on the surface is going to be exposed to a huge amount of UV radiation. And for those of you familiar with Mars, that is a big argument about how life can survive on Mars if there's no atmosphere, and the UV radiation and the gamma ray can destroy everything on the surface. On top of that, you have the salinity. So the surface of the pan, you don't really have a very nice crust of salt, but it's salty. So whatever lived there, it's really tough. And this type of tough microbes is what we call extremophiles, because they like the extreme environment, or they rather know how to survive in this environment. So this is one of the most interesting aspects of the Makari pans. Whatever live on the surface has managed to cope with extreme environments, and therefore has developed some strategies, metabolic strategies, that might be a clue to what we can find in a similarly dry environment, for instance, on Mars. So these are some photomicrographs of fossils of this type of extreme organisms, and these are from Sabca in Morocco. I didn't find the one from the pan, I'm sorry. So some of these microbes are so tough that they actually live inside the crystals of salt, and they wait until the salt is dissolved, the water comes back, so they can get out from the spore and start living again. So they are really amazing creatures. But of course, there are other reasons why we are interested in the pan. It's not just because of the life, but also for the processes. And believe it or not, a lot of the water that gets into the pan comes from the underground. And when it infiltrates, mostly from the north around Gueta, it infiltrates and then it reaches the pan floor. And when it gets to the surface, it creates this beautiful mounded morphology. They're sort of highland. Now they're covered in grass, but they look like highland in the ocean of white, salty, muddy surface of the pan. And they're very interesting because they look like something we described on Mars. So here I give you an equation, and this is the kind of equation we work with as a geologist. Similar shapes means similar processes. And this is the bottom line of most of our work when we work with analogues. We look for something that we've seen on other planets, and then we try to understand that if the process that formed that shape on our planet is the same that was active on Mars, Enceladus, and so on. So this is a slide that I normally use when I give this type of presentation, and I ask people which one is Mars and which one is planet Earth. So because we don't have time here, I'm going to give you the solution. On the left side, you have the example of the cascades at the top, which is compared with the conical mound on Mars. And on the right-hand side, you have the mounds we find in the Makari compared with some similar, very, very similar structure that we have on Mars. There is a striking resemblance also in terms of size, which is exceptional because normally everything on Mars is much, much bigger. There are other evidences of indirect evidence of water in the Makgadikgadi pans. If you sharpen your eyes, you would see in the very center of this satellite picture something that looks like a fan. And this is in fact an alluvial fan, so a former river. This is the Paleo-Boteti River. The Paleo-Boteti was coming from here. And this is a fossil delta. So it's a river that doesn't exist anymore, that deposits some sediments. And this type of deltas, not this in particular, but around our planet, are very, very important because most of our efforts on Mars are now devoted to the study of fossil deltas. This is Jezero crater. You know, it's the Mars 2020 landing site. So we are studying, well, not me, but you know, the scientific community is getting information out of this delta. And again, this was the river, and this one in front is the delta. I hope you can see my marker, because so a fossil delta on our planet in the Makgadikgadi can tell us a lot about processes that were probably active on Mars. And now we get to a very exciting part. Clearly, we are all familiar with the type of engineering tools, these technological tools, sorry, that we send on Mars to study its atmosphere, the rocks, the regolith, the soils, and so on. And but seldomly we have the chance to get in touch directly with one of these instruments. You see, this rover is made by a collection of instruments that we call payload. And we were lucky enough through the Europlanet project to have one of these instruments, namely MEDA, which is a weather station, here in Botswana, working in the pan. This is an instrument that is on Mars 2020 rover, and it was also part of the payload of ExoMars 2022. So here is a picture of the instrument in the pan near Mopipi. And this is the reason why this instrument was built. It was built to study the atmosphere of Mars. So the team that was studying the atmosphere of Mars through this instrument realized that there were dust devils. There was dust lifting events, of course, on the surface of Mars. And they were able to detect these events, which are very important, by the way, for understanding the whole atmospheric dynamic of the red planet. But they knew their instrument was picking up signal of dust devils. We know the dust devils are there from satellite picture, from Curiosity rover pictures, they're there. And now they had the analytical evidence, but they didn't know for sure how to interpret it. So they called me and said, listen, Fulvio, we need a very dusty place. Do you know it? I said, of course, come. And they came and installed their instrument in the middle of the Makgadikgadi pans. And here you see one of the engineers from the Spanish Aerospace Institute, MEDA. And they were measuring dust devil and dust lifting events in the pan. So this is another way of working into an analog. So taking extremely expensive technology that is already on another planet in a controlled environment, well, more or less controlled, because we had to chase a lot of this dust devil before we measured one. So to have a control on the data that you are obtaining from Mars in this case. And this is the team from INTA after 1 week working in the dust of the Makgadikgadi pans. But of course, we were all thinking about the red planet, Mars, and how the dust devil up there look much bigger and magnificent. Okay, so technically, my presentation would be finished by now because the original schedule was to talk about Africa. But I recently moved away from my comfort zone to visit another unusual analog, and I decided to squeeze it in because, well, I'd like to share this experience with you. And so I recently traveled north to the Svalbard in the Arctic Sea. And the reason why I went there is because I developed some interest for one of Saturn moons. Sorry, here Saturno is written in Italian, because this is taken from a lecture I gave to the University of Bologna. Apologies for that. So I developed some interest for Enceladus, which is one of Saturn's moon. And you should know that Enceladus was visited a few years back by the probe Cassini-Huygens. And this probe gave us some very interesting data. On this little moon, there are evidences for methane. And I would like to refer back to 20 slides ago when I was telling you how methane is interesting in terms of development of microbial life. And there are definitely hydrocarbons and organics. Enceladus is a gigantic snowball. It's covered by kilometers and kilometers of ice, but underneath there is liquid water. And there are these plumes ejected by some sort of energy that we don't know yet. So you have energy, you have liquid water, you have organics. So you have all the ingredients for life. That's why now Enceladus is one of the most appealing places to study in our solar system. To me, it is interesting because in my previous life, I spent a lot of time studying methane seeps and black smokers. So the one I showed you before that I compare with the Cascais in Morocco. So I said, come on, I mean, this is a good opportunity to put to some use what I've studied for many years. So if you look at Enceladus, you will find a lot of models. This is the one I like the most because it's very fascinating. It basically says that under this huge, thick cover of ice, there is an ocean, and at the contact between the ocean and the crust, there is a violent activity, hydrothermal, probably methane seeps activity, and that is, as I mentioned many times, very interesting for what concern life. And of course, where is a place where you have ice, ocean, and hydrothermal or gas seepage at the seafloor? The Svalbard, there you have, or actually in all the Arctic Sea, especially across the mid-oceanic region, there you have a surface covered by the pack ice, and at the bottom you have bubbling of CH4, which is methane, which sustain a very complex ecosystem based on microbial mat. So again, the microbes, the life that we expect to find outside our planet. And again, we call this type of system cold seeps. So my idea was to go there, explore this type of environment as a potential analog. So instead of doing it with the eyes of the marine scientist, to do it with the eyes of a planetary scientist. So I went there. The one dressed like a Teletubby on the left is me. I'm holding a high scorer. I was a guest of the Arctic University of Norway, and we were on the Kronprins Haakon research vessel, is an icebreaker. And what we did, we collect sample of ice, water, and sediments to understand how these interact and how they are linked to each other, and what kind of tools, simple tools, we can use to find evidence of life into the ice. Now, it sounds like a trivial question, but you must understand that I'm not an engineer, but the technology that we send in spacecraft, they are very versatile, but also limited in terms of the type of spectra, the type of signal they can reach. So finding evidence of life into ice might sound an easy job. Trust me, is not easy as it is as it sounds. Okay. So then we ran some experiments and we are still ongoing. This is an ice chamber we built in Debrecen in Hungary. So we are busy running some experiments and doing some simulation to understand how the next spacecraft launched in that direction on Enceladus can give us information about potential life thriving in the oceans under the ice. So to conclude, and this is just to conclude the part about the ice, you can have spacecraft like Cassini-Huygens orbiting around moons of Saturn, but that is just a part of the job. The other is to have a different type of vessel, a research vessel, that is sailing on top of a system that pretty much resemble what we expect to find with the very expensive Cassini-Huygens type space probes. And the same, you can have a very expensive rover on Mars, but you don't know where to send this rover until a geologist with the rugged Defender, Land Rover Defender, goes around the deserts of this planet, studying process and potential planetary analogues. I thank you for your attention and for inviting me today, and I'm happy to answer questions if any.
Thank you very much, Fulvio, for that fascinating presentation.
It was a bit too complicated, Jihan? I'm sorry if it was too much.
Fascinating. I'm sure there will be many questions coming to you now. It was fascinating. You went through a lot of information in this short period of time, so I'm sure there would be questions.
Yeah, that's why I was a bit concerned, but I was so excited that I didn't feel like cutting information, so that's why I'm apologizing. Because
yes, it's good that you covered that whole range of information that you have with you, and I'm sure there's much more details that you'll be willing to share. A question, a very layman question that I have is, when you look at the analogues, analog here in Makadikari, for example, and we compare it to Mars, whereas Mars has been dry for much millions of years or thousands of years, how would you find bacteria in that kind of environment? How would you know that there is life, as we call it, in that microbial form on Mars?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's one of the slides I cut. So I regret I cut that slide. So the Makadikari is what we call an evaporitic environment. So when you have water that evaporates, okay? So we believe that on Mars, inside certain craters, we had exactly the same process. So we had water coming in and then evaporating, precipitating some sediments, and then again, water evaporation. So you have layers like the one I showed you under those mounds. So you're very right. These sediments have been eroded for billions, not millions, for billions of years. So it's very true. That's our main issue. But at the same time, if we have instruments that can drill into the sediment, we believe we might find fossils. So the mineralized cells of these bacteria that might have lived into these evaporites. Clearly, it's a guesswork. I mean, we know bacteria are very tough. We know they live in the Makadikari. So if the same system existed on Mars, it's a good candidate for missions. So basically the whole job is to find the best candidate to send the rover, and the rover is the one that is going to answer your question and say, okay, I got a sample and I did this analysis and I found something. And now, briefly, that's the second part of the job. What kind of analysis are you going to do? imagine that you have one shot.
Yes.
So the scientific community is very much busy doing that. Okay, what is the best instrument, the best approach that with one single shot can unambiguously. So it's very fascinating, but very, very frustrating.
Thank you for that. David?
There was Stephen
Hi.
Barrett first.
Hi, Fulvio. Thank you very much for the talk. I enjoyed it a great deal. I think I see that that NASA has decided not to send up another probe to Mars. Is that going to make a difference to your or to the research? Thank you.
I am asking a political question. No, I mean, as you saw, I switched to Enceladus like 3 months ago. So I'm following the stream, but no, that's just a joke. Actually, there is always a great talk about these missions. So what we do, especially people in a small team like mine, we simply try to come up with good scientific questions, and we try to address these questions. A very quick example, during my PhD, as I said, methane was very cool. Everybody wanted to study methane because they thought there was methane on Mars. So we invested a lot of time, we came up with brilliant science, but then someone in the button room said, oh no, sorry guys, I think that was just a mistake or just a little bit of methane. There's no reason for you to study methane any further. And the entire community shifted to something else. That's what happened in this type of work. So you always have to keep an eye on what the trends are and the other eye on real science. So clearly when we do this type of work, there are also other questions that we answer. For instance, we are busy trying to understand how the Makgadikgadi evolved. That's not really planetary science, but is a very good scientific geological topic. So to answer your question, we are not going to be affected, but clearly we cannot avoid being influenced by these, can I call it fashions, or like, I don't have a proper English word to define that, but because they're not fashions, they're actually what the money is. Yeah.
Steve?
Thank you for that talk. Could I just ask, could you say a little more about what we might learn from hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean that will help us understand life elsewhere?
Yeah, very well. Yes, actually, that's where we believe that life started on our planet. So there are evidences that all the ingredients to create the primordial cells were present in these black or white smokers. So we think that life on Earth, like in terms of like bacterial life on Earth, probably began near a vent, an hydrothermal vent. It was a chemosynthetic life, so it wasn't life based on oxygen or it was clearly using other elements and other metabolic pathways. So the idea, just I'm oversimplifying it, but the idea, the reason why they're so interesting is because they have nutrients, they have energy, and they have water, of course.
And do we understand all the processes there, or do we need to study those more?
In terms of chemical and physical processes or biological?
I guess a little bit of both, but mainly biological, I suppose.
Or biological processes, we never stop learning, because life is so complex that we don't know, we cannot say for sure now we know everything about. And another thing is that this is an overrated statement, but I want to throw it there, is like we know more about our solar system than we know of our oceans. That's actually quite true, because these black smoker are very deep sometimes, so it's very expensive to study them. From a geological point of view, I can say that probably we know them quite well. From the biological point of view, definitely not. There is too much that we can still learn.
Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Oh my, no. Now the big professor is going to ask me the difficult question.
What? I don't think so. Anyway, thanks, Fulvio, for an excellent talk. I now know why you were in the Arctic a few months ago. Anyway, yeah, a couple of things. I remember just before I was due to start my PhD, this is a long, long time ago, 1976, the Viking lander had just landed on Mars, had a lab inside where they were adding some nutrients to Martian soil, and they analyzed the feeding, if bacteria were there, feeding bacteria and looking for the bacteria to burp, as it were. And they got a burp. And then they did it again and they got nothing. And so it was conjectured that either there was life or it was very strange chemistry. And I sort of lost. I remember sitting watching the main news that night, and it's the only time I've seen the main news feature a picture of Mars, and suddenly I knew something was important was going on, and this was the #1 story. They'd found life on Mars, but obviously they obviously hadn't found life on Mars. They'd found some strange chemistry, presumably, but that whole story seemed to fade away, and I don't know whether you know more about that than I do. Over all these years, it seemed to have been sort of forgotten. And the other one, of course, was 1996 with the Mars meteorite, which showed things that looked very much like those microstructures, microfossils that you showed. That again has been, it was something I think Bill Clinton talked about at the time. It made huge headlines, but again was proved to be something else, I believe, natural geology. Is that right?
Yeah, that meteorite actually almost killed the future of planetary science, because
right.
as I said, everybody was talking about it, and I'm pretty sure that the guy, they were trying to find a way to give him a Nobel Prize, even if there is no Nobel Prize. But it turns out that it was contamination.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Or I'm simplifying it a lot, but I remember that after that, there was a lot of work from the scientific community to try to convince people that no, now we can handle it. Don't worry, it's not going to happen again. If we find life,
right.
it's going to be for sure. So right. I have to tell you, Mike, I don't know about a Viking, but you gave us two options: life, strange chemistry, and I give you the third one that might be again contamination, because you know, now that there is the Mars sample return mission, you know that the rover is actually drilling some samples, and they are leaving the samples behind for another mission to come and fetch it. You know, 99.9% of the concerns is about contamination. Imagine the people going through again that meteorite thing, you know, again say, no, this time we find life on Mars, and then 10 years later, oh no, sorry, someone sneezed on the sample, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know about the Viking. I'm sorry about that. My fault.
No.
Someone is sharing the screen. Is someone sharing the screen here? Maybe.
Oh, is it Ken? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
But contamination plays a very big role in the type of astrobiology work. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you just indulge me for one moment, about 20 years ago, I visited Yellowstone National Park, and there you have these very hot springs and so on with extremophiles, very bacteria that can survive in those conditions. And as I stood there looking at those ponds, I thought, we always think of life evolving from this, you know, the primordial soup and so on. But are there conditions on the Earth at this very moment that are just so similar to that? That should we be looking, and perhaps people are doing this, looking for the formation of, is life being formed now in extreme environments, rather than being initially formed all those eons ago?
Wow.
If you have the same conditions, perhaps the conditions were very different with in the early Earth, but yeah, I don't know.
I knew you would drop the bomb. There's a very, I don't take it as a question to me because I don't have an answer, but it's a good point for discussion. It's actually a very good point. We study extremophiles. So we study, well, not me because I'm not a biologist, but I work with biologists and they do the metagenomic, the DNA, the protein study of bacteria that now, even fungi and algae that now live under extreme condition. But you gotta actually have a good point. We don't know if what we find is actually a new species or is something that formed yesterday. So that's actually a good question that maybe I can raise it with my astrobiology colleagues. I know they're gonna hate me for this question.
Well, it's it's not my area at all, but I've never heard anybody ask that, and I just stood there all those years ago and thought, is it happening now? Anyway, I'm sure they know. But
so there's another question from Mojo.
Chitabili.
Yes, thank you very much, Say, for sharing that information. I'm a Christian and also I believe also in science, yes. There are certain things which I'm still wondering where we pick that in the beginning from the Bible. It says the earth was formless, it was with water, right? And then later, when it was being created, there was light and the waters were divided. I'm here to ask, when we are learning about this water thing, that you'll find it amazing when you were telling us about water coming from underground. How can this be connected with the biblical, what can I say, concept, right? And the scientific concept, does this connect?
Wow, I'm probably gonna need some help here. As a scientist, we always try to keep science and religion separate. So very seldomly we ask ourselves questions that are crossing this border because it's not easy, okay? Water is certainly something that has been always known to create life. So not surprisingly, it was put there at the beginning. As a geologist, I can tell you that water didn't come first, actually, because our planet was a gigantic ball of fire. And the water came, someone says, from the condensate of the vapor of the volcanoes. Someone says from comets, icy comets. So it was put there on our planet. But the bottom line is that life as we know it cannot exist without water. It's a mandatory requirement for life, for microbial life, for humans, for plants, for everything. Even the bacteria that live in the pan and they can stay months without water, they still need moisture, very small droplets in order for them to survive. So water is life. I mean, it's very simple and maybe trivial to say, but that is a fact. Maybe in 20, 50, 60 years from now, we will discover that there is water is not the only media that can sustain life. But for now, that is a quite solid scientific truth, and apparently also a biblical truth. So on this one, we can agree.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll come sometime with a lot of questions. Thank you very much.
Anytime. You can find my email on Boost website, and you can send me email and ask all the questions you want.
Any more questions? Any geologists who would like to ask Fulvio questions?
Why you hate me now, Jihan?
I don't hate you. I admire you very much, especially the.
No, I'm just joking. I don't see geologists. Well, of course, our president is a geologist. Where is he?
Yes, I was aiming at him.
Oh, I'm learning a lot. I mean, this is all fascinating information. So, I mean, from a geological point of view, it is it's an open question. So, we are all learning. Let me say, I don't have a particular question right now.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Fulvio, for this very informative presentation. We enjoyed it thoroughly. And thanks so much, Fulvio.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, good night, everyone. The committee will meet after this for our committee meeting. Thank you.
Good
And
night.
good
Thanks,
night.
Fulvio.